So where we left off was asking about what this moral law might be, which imposes obligation upon us. And the answer to that, I think, really is categorical imperatives, which are introduced first one. And the very idea of the categorical imperative at the bottom of page 224. Again, it's always good to just stop and think about jargon like this, to ask what is actually being said. A categorical imperative, as we see, there are three of them. Kind of the third one's a little different, but three categorical imperatives, three ideas or three rules, three examples of laws that Kant says that we're obliged to follow. And again, this is something that we discover through pure reason rather than through experience, he claims. And we know what they are, right? There's the sort of the universalizability one. There's the one having to do with respect for persons. And finally, there's the one that is not really quite a rule, but the idea of the kingdom of ends. We're really going to be focusing mostly on the first two. But what does it mean to say that something is a categorical imperative? Well, if we break this up, first, an imperative is a command or a rule. Order, really. It's a grammatical thing. Instead of making a statement about the world, we are giving an order for someone to do something in the world. Do this or don't do that. So an imperative is an order or command to act or to not act. To say something is categorical more or less means that it is unconditional. It is exceptionless. It is not hypothetical. A hypothetical command or a hypothetical imperative would be something that had an if. A hypothetical command would be, if you want this, then do that. See, what you see there is a condition. The condition is the if. If you want this, then do that. If you want to grow up to be big and strong, eat your vegetables. If you want to cross this street safely, cross only at corners. If you don't want those things, then there's no reason to do that. If you want to play pool better, think about your next shot. That's just it's the hard thing about playing pool. If you want to play pool better, don't just try to sink the ball. Try to leave the cue ball someplace where you can sink the next ball, which is the key to playing pool better. But if you don't really care, if you're just playing for fun, then don't worry about it. Don't worry about thinking about your next shot. Just have fun hitting the balls, right? So those would all be hypothetical imperatives. So if a hypothetical imperative says, if you want this, then do that, the categorical imperative just says, do that, right? Always, no matter what, right? So as you can see, it's a very difficult thing for Kant to actually say what are the categorical imperatives, because one could certainly say that there are no unconditional, universal, exceptionless commands that we must always follow, right? That it may be, and I think that if you're a utilitarian, you would have a lot of sympathy for that. What I actually do is dependent upon circumstances. So Kant, for instance, saying that we should never lie, which is his prime and really infamous example of a categorical imperative, which he outlines in this section on the first categorical imperative, is really quite controversial, because some people would say, with a lot going for them, that there are situations in which lying is the only thing to do and the only right thing to do. Right? Making a false promise in some situations is situationally what's demanded. But Kant would say that no, not lying is covered under the categorical imperative. Well, okay, so if we have a notion of what a categorical imperative is, let's look at the first one, which is the one about universalizability, which is a mouthful, but I think is the easiest way I can find to refer to that. He asks, but what sort of law can that be, the thought of which must determine the will without reference to any expected effect? Remember, he's not a consequentialist. So that the will can be called absolutely good without qualification. Since I have deprived the will of every impulse that might arise for it from obeying any particular law, there is nothing left to serve the will as principle except the universal conformity of its actions to law as such. That is, I should never act except in such a way I can also will that my maxim should become a universal law, which is, I think, a pretty good statement of the first categorical imperative. Let's look it over again. Again, this is on page 224. I should never act except in such a way that I can also will that my maxim should become a universal law. Let's try to put that in different words, which is always a good exercise, putting things in different words, trying to retain the meaning. Something like that. I mean, I don't know if that's any clearer. Whatever I do, I should be able to stand behind my rule of action. That would be my maxim. Being willing that everyone should act in the same way. That's the idea that, well, I can always reconstruct a rule. Whenever I do something, I can always say, well, okay, here's the general rule I was following. And what I'm asking is whether that general rule could become or should become a rule for everyone. Like if I was the universal legislator, if I was making rules for everyone, would that be a rule that I could will everyone to follow? That is, can I universalize that rule? And the categorical imperative here gives us a standard or criterion. If I can will that it be a rule for everyone, then it's okay to do. Right? That is, whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm thinking of doing, if I can universalize the rule by which I'm acting, then it's okay to do. Go ahead and do it. There's no reason not to do it. That is, if it would be okay for everyone to act the same in the same circumstances, then do it. If I can't universalize it, then I know that it would be unethical to do. That is, if I can't will that it become a universal law, as Kant thinks that lying cannot be universalized, and take a look at his argument, then I know that it would not. It would not be an ethical thing to do. Again, I might do it. Of course I might do it, knowing that it's not universalizable and therefore knowing that it's unethical, but it's just we do things that are unethical, right? Um, okay, let's talk about one of the examples I gave. Mitt Romney decided to vote to convict President Trump in his trial in the Senate, his impeachment trial in the Senate. He decided that the only ethical thing to do would be to vote to convict. But he had all sorts of prudential reasons not to do it. Political reasons, obviously. He knew he would be attacked by the president, by other Republicans if he were to do it. So he might have not done it, right? He might have not voted to convict. He might have voted to acquit, knowing that it was the right thing to do, at least according to his conscience. But he might have decided not to do it, of course. I mean, we cave into pressure. We cave into, well, to a certain degree, consequentialism, right? But so just because he did doesn't mean he had to. I mean, he might have recognized that he had a duty to vote to convict, but not voted to convict because of other considerations. We do that stuff all the time. It just means we're human beings. So yeah, I mean, Romney voting, whatever you think of the actual trial of Trump in the Senate, or I mean, that's completely up to you. But you kind of have to recognize that Romney's act of following his conscience and voting was a pretty good Kantian situation. You had somebody who felt they had a duty to do something, no matter what the consequences were in terms of its effect on their personal happiness and the personal happiness of people that they care about, the fate of their political party. But they decided that they had a duty to do it nonetheless. It's kind of like really a go-to Kantian example. Again, it doesn't matter if he was right or wrong in your opinion. Of course, you're free to decide for yourself. But I think it's an undeniably a good example of someone following their conscience, and just the way that Kant thought that we always should. Yeah, so that's the first categorical imperative, is universalizability, I think. I don't know how far we are in this video, but let's take a look at the second one. I'll make a new video. The second one will focus on the second version of the categorical imperative. I want to make a different, separate video just because it's so important, the respect for persons one. So I'll make one more video. Sorry for the length.